Hello. So another segment of the nutrient management part of the Certified Crop Advisor segment is nutrient placement and timing. Several competencies that we're going to look at here. Again, a lot of these things are over and repeating and re-emphasizing things and overlaps, but that's okay. We want to make sure we understand all the things that are important for a crop advisor to know. The first competency we want to talk about here is recognize a cropping system's influence on the following: in other words, soil fertility level, method of applying nutrients, and timing of nutrient application. In other words, what was a previous crop and the current crop, and how does it affect these three things? Well, one thing that happens on soil fertility levels is the organic matter is going to affect your nitrogen. Legumes, cover crops, there's always carryover from legumes. There's a little bit of debate of how much carryover there is. But as a crop consultant, you need to work with your client and figure out, okay, how much are we going to allow from the previous crop carryover? Alfalfa, you could almost take full credit on corn for nitrogen in that first year, depending on the quality of the alfalfa that's being plowed out. Soybeans, there's some debate, particularly with our higher yield soybeans now, our 80, 100 bushel soybeans that some people are seeing are they really leaving much nitrogen in that soil, or are they scavenging stuff out of there? So there is some debate, some research going on there, but as a crop advisor, that's your responsibility. Sort that out and work with your client to get them the most profitable level considering the previous crops. Cover crops is something new that's coming on now. Particularly in areas that have erosion issues, or in dairy and cattle operations where they're chopping off the silage. Cover crops help build the soil health. They also hopefully help build the organic matter. There's a lot of studies going on with that right now. Again, what's the impact there as we work with that? Soil fertility levels. Intensive high yield cropping removes or mines more nutrients. We didn't used to worry about nutrients, particularly the secondaries, micros, as much as we do nowadays. Because the higher yield crops, more intensive cropping we're doing now is really mining a lot of nutrients out of there. The table here shows you how many nutrients are taken out per bushel or per ton, depending on what you're harvesting in. And when we had 100 bushel corn, we weren't taking out nearly as much as when we're getting a 250 bushel corn. A lot more nutrients are coming out, including our micros. And I just show you the primaries here, but including the secondaries and micros, they become more of a consideration nowadays. And as a crop advisor, we've got to think about when we're seeing issues out there. Method and timing of nutrient application. We'll hit this a couple different times, but primarily I'm going to talk about nitrogen. In the fall, we want to make, on this slide, in the fall, we want to make sure we're putting on less than 15 degrees. The nitrogen cycle, which you've studied, nitrogen is converted by microbes from ammonium to nitrate when it's over 50 degrees Fahrenheit, and then if that happens, it's more likely to leach from the soil. So if we're going to put it on in the fall, that becomes an issue. We might try a split application. We might want to make sure we incorporate our nitrogen. The closer we can get that nitrogen to the time the crop needs it, which typically is close to that tassel time, is when the highest demand between, as you see that chart there, between 30 and 60 days there, that is highest demand time. The closer we can get to nitrogen to that application time, the better off we're going to be. If we take a look at phosphorus placement, more is banded phosphorus. We're seeing a lot of discussion about that. Particularly if it's rented land that you may only have for a year or two, but not sure if you're going to have it for long term. You're not necessarily, you want to build up those phosphorus levels in that field if you're going to be losing that field in a year or two, because you don't get all the phosphorus in that first year when you do a broadcast application. On your own farm, yeah, you want to build that fertility up to that optimum level and maintain it there. On a rented land, if you can band it next to the crop, it's more likely to get that fertilizer that year, and your return on investment is a little bit better, at least in the short term. Long term doesn't make any difference. Describe advantages, limitations of the following nutrient placement methods. A lot of different ways of putting nutrients in the field. Injection, particularly as we talk about manure, is a common practice out there. It does require replacement below the soil surface. Typically, that's going to take more horsepower. You got to think about that also, and specialized equipment. They're more likely to stay in the soil, though, particularly nitrogen. You put it on the surface, you're going to have a lot of volatilization of nitrogen. But even your other nutrients, particularly like phosphorus, if it's on the surface of soil and you have erosion, you're going to lose some of your phosphorus. It does allow you a little more precise placement, an example of side dressing there. And like I mentioned, it does require some specialized equipment, a little higher horsepower to put fertilizer on this way. Surface broadcast is historically been the most common way of getting our fertilizers out there. You get a nice uniform spread over that whole field. It could lose some nutrients to volatilization erosion. In the case of manure, there are some odor issues, but again, probably the most cost-effective way of at least getting the fertilizer applied. maybe not most profitable depending on how you crunch the numbers as a crop advisor, but definitely most cost effective in getting a lot of nutrients out there. As we look at broadcast, excuse me, let's get that to work there. As we look at Broadcast Incorporated, essentially we're putting it at a broadcast fertilizer on the top of the surface, but we're coming back right away within 24 hours and digging that and burying that fertilizer in there. Whether it be a general tillage equipment, a plow, or in the case of the umbilical cord at the bottom picture there with manure, where we're actually pumping it right in front of a chisel plow or a piece of equipment that's incorporating in there. Again, uniformly spread. You get incorporate soil, you minimize your odor, might get some more erosion because you're doing tillage now, particularly if this is a fall application, and obviously with tillage there's issues of soil compaction that we could run into also with that. Fertigation, not a big thing here in the upper Midwest. That's using a fertilizer rig to actually put your nutrients on with your, using that irrigation rig to put your nutrients on with that irrigation. Where you do have irrigation available, it's a good way to get fertilizer on. Basically, you can more precisely time it. You can put fertilizer in all season long when the crop needs it. A couple disadvantages. One, obviously, wind, a very strong wind, and you may not get a uniform application as you like, particularly if it's gusting in different directions. And you can have some evaporation too, particularly with something like nitrogen as we look at it. Foliar application, again, fertigation would typically be a foliar application. Usually it's with smaller applications of nutrients. You don't want to put a heavy amount on if you're putting it right on the leaves. Okay, you're going to put it on maybe several times, or possibly your micronutrients. Your major nutrients going on in large quantities that can actually burn your crop, and that's not what you want. Your micronutrients, if you found some issues out there, and like I said, we're starting to see a few pop up out there in our secondaries. They're required in smaller quantities. They can work with foliar applications as we look at it. Side dress, typically when we talk about side dress, we're talking about nitrogen, whether it be liquid nitrogen or anhydrous. We've done it after the crop has emerged and we're knifing it in down next to that crop. We're getting it closer to that timing of when the crop needs it, a big advantage of it. Also, a time of year, it may be a little more conducive. You have a little more time on your hand as you're working with this. Top dress, typically you're just applying it over top of the crop. This is more common in your small grains, your hays, and even on your lawns. Again, this is a foliar application, so we gotta watch the amounts that are going on there so we don't burn our crop. In-furrow placement, that's where you're typically putting it on with the planter. The actual in-furrow means more of a pop-up where the fertilizer is put right with the seed. There are some seed burn issues and salt index. We'll talk a little bit about that in a later slide. But that's what we mean by in-furrow application. Describe advantages, limitations, the following times of application. Again, we talked a little bit about timing of application. Let's hit it again. Fall, the big advantage of fall is better availability of labor, equipment, and even fertilizer is easier to get a hold of in the fall. We're not quite as swamped doing a lot of other things in the fall. Fertilizer price may actually be a little bit better in the fall because it's a slower time and they're trying to push that fertilizer out, and the elevator, the co-op, is actually wanting to get pre-sales done so they can guarantee the fertilizer sold rather than farmers changing their mind by next spring. So there may be some price advantages. Again, the caution on anhydrous, make sure it's below 50 degrees and use an end stabilizer if you're fall applying anhydrous. Spring pre-plant, apply close to the time the crop actually needs it. With phosphorus, not a big deal because it's very stable. Potassium, mostly stable, not a problem. Nitrogen, yeah, it can be a big difference if you apply in the spring versus fall. The other advantage of spring application, it's easier to calculate your profitable level. What do I mean by that? Well, in the fall, we're not positive what the prices will be next year for our crop. We can look at a little bit. By the time spring runs around, we got a little better handle on what's going to happen this year. The kind of yields we're going to get this year, the weather's starting to figure out our weather a little bit. We're starting to figure out what prices are going to be and when to harvest. So we got a lot more input information, so we can say, you know what, are we going to bump our fertilizer up this year because it looks like a real good year, or should we be a little more conservative in our application this year because things are going to be a little tighter and the weather doesn't look as good this year. So you can make adjustments a little easier in the spring than in the fall because you got a little better handle on what's going to happen in the coming year. At planting, pre-emergence, again, putting it on with the planter. Advantage combined with planting operation, so you're saving a trip over the field. Common way of putting it on with no-till. Another advantage with no-till, which I didn't list here, is you're actually getting some fertilizer down in that ground, 4 inches into that ground instead of spreading it on the top. Again, closer to the time the crop's needed. With no-till also, we've seen a little better results, particularly helping to get that crop off to a better start. No-till, you're working with colder soils. You haven't tilled it up, you haven't warmed up that soil. It's a little tougher start for that plant. Here's an example, and this is from a company website. Maybe you don't see this as much as often, but here's an example of no starter versus a starter, 28% liquid 28 going on. You can see there was some really good early growth there with the stuff that got the starter. Other thing we got to watch is potential salt injury, which again we'll talk a little more about. Post-emergence, correct some growing condition issues you have out there. The late spring end test. We'll talk about split application here in a second, but going out there once the corn's about a foot tall, testing the soil at that time for nitrogen, because we know nitrogen in the upper Midwest is fairly mobile here in the east. Testing in the fall really doesn't do us a lot of good east of the Missouri River. So we got to test in the spring. Okay, now we can test, see, oh, maybe we put some nitrogen already on, but we can make some corrections because it's not quite enough. Weather may be better in the spring than in the fall. We're not going to hit into our winter areas that we're going to run into. We're talking summer now. After planting, again, we're not worried about the rush of the season. Things are slowing down a little bit as long as we get it out there soon enough. Also quite common on hay ground. In fact, if we're going to split some applications, you may do one after a couple different cuttings on hay ground for post-emergence. A split application, most commonly done with nitrogen. Here's a research from, this I found from Pioneer's website. It was done by an university, but they published this information there. The web link's on the bottom if you want to type it in, check out some more information about that. But the advantage of split application, put at least your minimum on in the beginning, go back, do that late spring nitrogen test, see where you're at. Sometimes you need more, sometimes you don't, so you can be much more effective in using it. For those people who are really trying to push the yield barriers, maybe they're in a national corn growers contest or something like that, they're going to do split applications because they're going to try and get that fertilizer on several different times to get as much out there as they can and not concentrate all in one application. So that's another way you can push your yields with that too as you look at it. Explain the following factors affect seed germination, fertilizer planting and planting. Okay, again, here's some issues when we're using starter fertilizer. You really want to try and keep that fertilizer band away from the seed. Single side band, a double side band, putting it below seed, or even a split boot kind of above the seed into the two sides. Some of those aren't as far away from the seed as we want. The most common is that side band 2 inches over and 2 inches down that we see. Gets that fertilizer where those roots are going to run into it really quick in the season, but also away from the seed. Why is that an issue? Well, it's a salt index. And you can see some formulations here. This is just some examples from one website. If we look at 28% liquid nitrogen or UAN, you put that in the furrow, you got some pretty big issues. You're probably going to damage those seeds and have a lot of seeds that don't come up. You get into a 2-20-20 formulation up there with potassium phosphate as a potassium source. You can see the salt index is a lot lower. We're a lot safer with that. So if you're going to do a pop-up right with the seed, you got to watch that salt index. If you're going to do planter application at all, you need to be considering that salt index. Last slide, form and rate of fertilizer. Common sense, or dry is probably your safest. Your liquid tends to be a little more dangerous, and gas, such as anhydrous ammoniac, and ammonia was first put on there can do some damage to the crops also. And also, by obviously, the higher the rate you put on, the more potential you have for damage. Okay, that completes this unit.